The Corps of Discovery reached the Pacific Ocean in November of 1805. Although they were eager to return home, the weather was getting cooler and they needed to find a place to winter. They spent 1 month in a temporary camp along the Pacific Ocean before deciding to move upriver to a site found by Captain Meriwether Lewis earlier that year. This site would soon become known as Fort Clatsop, named after the local Indian tribe. Clearing of the new site began immediately. It would take the men until Christmas Eve to finish the fort. There are 2 recorded floor plans of the fort, one drawn by Sergeant John Ordway and the other by Captain William Clark.
The fort was 50 feet square with 2 parallel cabins. One cabin contained 3 rooms, each with a central fire pit, which were the enlisted men's quarters. The opposite cabin contained 4 rooms, 2 with fire pits and 1 with a fireplace and exterior chimney. The orderly room, which had a fire pit, the storeroom, which had a locking door, the rooms shared by the captains, which had a fireplace and exterior chimney, and the Charbonneau family room were all located on this side. 2 gates were installed, one at each end of the parade ground. One was the main gate, which was locked at night. At the opposite end, the second gate was used to access the spring for water or other necessary trips outside the fort.
For 3 months, the fort would house 32 men, 1 woman, a baby, and a dog. During the expedition's stay at the fort, it rained all but 12 days. Due to the dreadful weather, daily routines became an essential way of passing the time. The men would trade for dried fish and root vegetables, and every day hunters would search for meat. They killed 130 elk, 20 deer, and many small animals that winter. The men would often stay out overnight, away from the fort while on a hunt. Due to the rain, the men often stayed indoors, doing tasks ranging from servicing their weapons, to sewing moccasins to making elk fat candles. A group from the expedition party was sent to the coast to extract salt from the seawater. They remained there, boiling the water until February 21st, 1806. 2 days after Christmas, 1805, Clatsop Indians told the Corps of Discovery that a whale had washed ashore southwest of Fort Clatsop. Because of adverse weather conditions, Clark and other members of the Corps did not reach the whale until January 8th. By the time the party reached the beach, only the whale's bones remained. The Nehalem Indians, who had gathered much of the whale's remains, were reluctant to part with any of it. But Clark did manage to obtain about 300 pounds of blubber to add to the food supply, and a few gallons of rendered oil. Lewis sampled the blubber and found it
not unlike the fat of pork, though. The texture was more spongy and somewhat coarser. I had a part of it cooked and found it very palatable and tender. It resembled the beaver or the dog in flavor.
Lewis and Clark maintained a strict military routine.
A system of guard duty was established, which constantly occupied a sergeant and 3 enlisted men. A sentinel was constantly posted, and at sundown each day the fort was cleared of visitors and the gates locked for the night. The guard was in charge of announcing approaching groups of Indians, opening and closing the gates, tending the meat house fires and wood supply, periodically checking the condition of the canoes at the landing site, and bringing in wood for the fireplace in the captain's quarters.
The expedition's relationship with the Clatsop and Chinookan Indians was very good overall. The Indians interacted extensively with the expedition. They exchanged goods and services and information on a regular basis. The Corps relied heavily on the Indians for fish and vegetables. When the Corps arrived at the Chinook village, it was not the first encounter with the white man for the Chinookan people. In fact, European disease and goods had affected them long before the expedition arrived. But no group from any European nation had ever spent as much time interacting with and recording information about the Chinookan people as did the expedition. The material recorded by the Lewis and Clark expedition during their stay is the best contact-era observation of the Chinookan people and their life prior to the settlement of the Oregon country and the end of their pre-contact way of life. Overall, the nights at Fort Clatsop were miserable ones. The men suffered from colds, influenza, rheumatism, and other ailments.
Because of the rain, our clothing began to rot, and fleas infested the blankets and hides of the bedding to such a degree that a full night's sleep was often impossible.
Because of the miserable conditions, the expedition decided to leave the fort on March 23, 1806, instead of the original April 1st departure. They quickly departed and left the fort in the hands of the Clatsop chief, Cobaway.